Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending. We will be starting momentarily.
There's another.
Oh, there is another one.
Yes.
So we're
Hello, I'm going to try and get us back on the other camera. Hang on one second.
Again, I'd like to welcome everyone. It's the top of the hour, and we will be starting in a moment or two, just giving people a chance to log in. So please bear with us, and we'll get started in a second.
Yeah. Because it says to go.
Trent, why don't you go to the next slide? Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Spiro. I'm the president and founder of School Sims, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar today. And on behalf of the School Sims team, and also our co-host, Trent Grundmeyer from Drake University, who I will be introducing shortly. But our session today is on managing conflict, and in particular, bias in the hiring process. And Trent, if you just move down the next two slides. As most of you know, or many of you know, we can go to the next one. We'll come back and meet Trent. Our operating premise is that experience is the best teacher, and we use simulation to approximate experience, as is done in the aviation industry and in healthcare or in the military, right? You wouldn't put any of those professionals into their slots without hours in simulation. And we believe the same thing goes for both administrators and also for teachers, for that matter. How can we put people who are responsible in these high stakes industries for such important things where the decisions are so complicated without the opportunity to have experience, safe experience? And as we all know, from infancy, we learn from experience. And in history, any important role, any important job that one had, you had to apprentice. The opportunity to learn by doing is critical, and especially in the job of administration and teaching. And in particular nowadays, and this is something that Trent is going to speak a little bit more about, with the learning loss that we've experienced over the pandemic, one of the key things to help stem that and actually reverse it is going to be stability. It's going to be keeping the same person on the job, in the building, in the district, and in the classroom. And that really falls to our principals. It all falls to our leadership teams in the buildings. And one of the things we look at is the churn that has been happening, and the data are horrifying in terms of the proximity, the how people are going to be leaving the role. And that is going to keep us from being able to, in fact, maintain that level of stability, to keep people on the job, and to stem and to maintain and to increase the learning. And one of the key things that causes the churn is discomfort on the job, not enough development, being uncomfortable with things that they have to face. They're alone, it's very isolating, and having to deal with difficult conversations, difficult stakeholders, difficult situations, which again, we can't tell you how to respond to them for each type of thing, because each one is new, each one is different. But how we think, that's what we can practice, that's what we can get better at. And one of the key things that we have are difficult conversations. And often that's influenced by bias. It's influenced by a perception. Look, as human beings, we're all biased creatures. We can't help it. Some of those biases are meaningless, but some are not. And the opportunity to practice, to not be as reactive, to take it as it comes, but make the best decisions we can, to have practice with that is key. And that's really why we've set about, in partnership with Trent, to be able to provide this type of simulation to address this kind of need. And I'm delighted to introduce Trent Grundmeyer, who is a former teacher, principal, superintendent, a professor at Drake University, as is involved in placements relative to superintendents looking for jobs. He has had a wealth of experience both in the job and around the job, and I'm delighted to have him take over at this point and share with you some additional ideas and the simulation. Trent?
Yeah, thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. And good to see everybody on a Thursday afternoon. I appreciate it. And I think you'll enjoy the simulation. Maybe Ken doesn't want to hear this, but I will tell you very directly that this simulation of many that I've helped create is the one that I've enjoyed developing the most. And I hope you will too. And I think there's a lot of value to it. With that being said, I do want to offer, and Ken mentioned that I have a university role at Drake University here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I advise the superintendent program of aspiring AEA and district leaders. But I have a unique hat as well, where I hire a lot of principals and superintendents around the Midwest and stay connected with school sims as well. And we've actually used the simulations in the hiring process. And I find in teaching objectivity in the hiring process and the legalities in my advanced school law class that, you can read the textbook stuff, but actually identifying and structuring an objective hiring process is something I aim to do as a search consultant and something I try to teach in my aspiring superintendent classes. So when I pitched this idea to Ken a long time ago, it's been a long time in the making, but you're going to see the fruits of our labor in this simulation. Before we get started, Ken alluded to this, and maybe you've seen, we're all survivors of the pandemic, but it's certainly taken a toll on educators in general, from associates and teachers, paraeducators to school leaders. And I just remind you about how important the role of a school leader and educator is, because our average principal tenure now is 4 years or less. And it's very similar across the board for superintendents in our country. So we're going to be dealing with turnover, which means hiring and being part of that process. There's certainly a cost to that as well. Not only is it the culture costs, but there's a financial cost to recruiting and hiring that I think is going to continue. And you can see, based on this research from the Learning Policy Initiative, the average replacement cost of a principal from rural Iowa to suburban Iowa is around $75,000 based on this research. And so there's certainly pressure in time and finances and commitment and culture to get principal, superintendent, and any educational position right. We also know the impact. I'm not boring folks with the research, but you go back to Waters, McNulty, Marzano research about the effects of the school principal and superintendent only being second to the classroom teacher. So we know how important it is to get the right person in classrooms, leading buildings and leading districts. That was recently backed up, if you've read the Wallace research last February, 2021, on how principals affect student achievement. And by the way, the 4-year turnover from principals was also in this report. But again, just quickly highlighting the importance that we all know of building and district leaders. Now, as we talk about the topic today, bias in the hiring process, I want to first of all acknowledge some of those avenues on bias, but also start with this diagram you see in front of us that we've probably all experienced one way or another, and that's around the fit, cultural fit. Christoph, in this original research, 1999 is what it goes back to, talks about person and organization fit. And there's really a lot to do with that. Comes out a lot of different ways. And I'm going to show you a local study here coming up, but this fit really talks about at any level, the organization needs and culture on the left over here, and the person and their values, goals, attitudes, characteristics, if you will, and how they match. The more we can structure the hiring process, the more objectivity we can try to get to that clear fit. And hopefully then, the more comfortable the leader is, the more effective they are, and hopefully the more productive they are in results in the end. So when we think about fit, we think about minimizing the bias in a hiring process. I just want to acknowledge that a lot of it goes back to the person organization fit, because a high quality leader in one school may not flourish in the next, and vice versa. And we have to acknowledge what that culture, cultural norms and expectations are in the various systems. With that being said, here's my experience and a recent study that I actually look at quite frequently. It was a study out of Iowa here on a dissertation defense, and I actually have a student right now following this study up. I think it's fascinating, and I want to share it just briefly with you. I'll summarize for your sake here, but this was a 2013 study evaluating school board members in our state here of Iowa. And what they found on the hiring process for, again, district superintendents was that female board members tended to prioritize candidates' ethics, their curriculum background, and their interpersonal or soft skills in the hiring process as a larger priority than other factors. Okay. And male board members, ironically, prioritized financial acumen or skills, facilities leadership, and leadership style over ethics, curriculum, interpersonal skills. Now, that's obviously not all the standards, but those were priorities flushed out in Ed Clamfoth's study. And I think that's really important, but I also think it's important to level set with you before we jump into this simulation about bias that board members may have in hiring a district leader as well. And if they acknowledge these biases going into that process. And again, that's part of our attempt to create this simulation and hopefully be able to leverage it and use it with board members as we help them hire superintendents around the Midwest as well. So hopefully you find that kind of interesting. I certainly do. Now, obviously, before we dig in, you're going to see lots of different types of bias in this simulation. I want to acknowledge that, we did not create the simulation to flush out every type of bias, but you're certainly going to see some types of bias more than others. And on the bottom of this, there's a separate study there. Actually, it was an article, I shouldn't say a study, but this resonated with me. And again, I think it confirmed our direction with this bias simulation and hopefully the value you see in it today as well. But notice the byline under this Harvard Business Leadership article. It talked about 7 steps to reduce bias in hiring. The key to take bias out of a hiring process is not trying to take it out of the candidates, but out of the process itself. Not trying to take it out of the people that might be ingrained over years and years and years of experience, but the process. And so that's what this simulation, I think, is a strong attempt to do. So I'm going to pause there and ask if there's any quick questions, and I'm going to pivot to the simulation so we can experience it together firsthand here next. Any questions before we start the bias in hiring simulation? Okay, I think that's the extent of our wait time. So I'm going to walk us through this simulation. I don't know if we'll get through all of it in the next 45 minutes, but I hope to get through a lot of it so you can see it firsthand. And I will just warn you right up front. I have polls set up, chat set up. I may break you in groups briefly so that you can engage with this simulation as we move through it as well firsthand.
So we're here to make a recommendation to the superintendent on the new hire for the high school principal. Let's talk about those candidates.
All right, so you're going to see in this simulation, you're going to be the outgoing superintendent of Gunderson Community School District. It's a 3A system with 3,500 kids, 500 staff, 4 elementaries, 1 middle school, 1 high school. Due to a short tenure as their superintendent, the superintendent wants a voice in the next high school principal hire. You've already conducted initial interviews and have a limited field that wants to be involved here. So we have board members, we have candidates, and we're going to kind of navigate this board conversation as we move through the sim. Here we go.
Welcome to the Bias in the Hiring Process simulation. Click the next button at the bottom right to begin. As events unfold, you will need to work with school board and constituents to make the best decision for the district. You will be challenged to act with integrity and fairness while promoting equity and professional norms in an ethical manner. As you make decisions and experience their consequences, your choices will be recorded. A report will be presented at the end of the simulation, as well as detailed feedback on each of your decisions. Good luck. Gunderson is a rapidly growing suburb in a large metropolitan area. Demographics are shifting. Currently 80% white, the population of Gunderson is projected to be less than 60% white in the next 5 years. Although this shift has not been directly addressed by the board, you've sensed growing tension. Some board members seem to have difficulty embracing the growing diversity of the school and community. In this simulation, you will play the role of the new superintendent at the Gunderson Community School District. This district has 3,500 students, 500 staff members, 4 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. You are currently engaged in finding a new principal for the high school. Due to the visibility of this position in the community, the board has requested a voice in the process to select a new high school principal. They've asked you to facilitate a group discussion to select the right candidate. Because candidates may be applying for multiple positions, you really hope to be able to offer the job to the successful candidate and get the board support immediately following the upcoming board meeting.
Okay, I'm sure some of you are probably in the midst of hiring now and trying to beat other districts or other interviews that are out there. But to level set on this one here, we're in the process here just to tell you where we're at in the sim now. We've interviewed 4 candidates for the high school principal position. All are external, so we don't have any internal candidates. You used interview teams, one of students, one of staff, one of community members, and you'll have that feedback. Following the interviews of your finalists, you met with each of the teams to compile the feedback. And normally in this situation, it's the superintendent's recommendation to the board. Again, since you've only been on the job less than a full year, the board's requested to be involved in this hiring decision. So that's kind of the context and setting the stage for the sim. Now it's time for our board meeting. So here we go.
Okay, hey, everybody, let's sit down. Let's get this meeting started. It's 6:02. By my watch, I'll get the meeting called to order. Let's do roll call. Maxwell, I'm here. Vander. Here. Goodson.
Here.
Stockwell. Here. Pearson.
Here.
All right. The superintendent has also joined us for this meeting. Do I have a motion for this one agenda item?
I'll make a motion to enter into a closed session to review the hiring or appointment of personnel.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're in closed session. Now, you take it from here.
Okay, I guess it's on us
You want to
now.
engage the board in discussion regarding the 4 candidates that have been interviewed. Which of the following will you do? Select all that apply. Politely explain or reiterate the importance of the decision. You need each member of the board to engage and give this their best effort. Review the process that was used to this point. The background information will provide them context for their discussion. Provide an overview of the data derived from the various interview teams. Input from the various interviewing groups will help expand their perspective. Provide detailed data about each candidate. This detail will potentially preempt questions and streamline the process. Provide them with community survey results. The community survey data should provide meaningful context for their discussion.
Okay, and you can see on this one with the options, the narrator there read those options there, but if you click these little icons, you can kind of get an idea of a little deeper on each option. And this one, we get to select more than one option. So I'm going to pause here and I'll go democratically the direction that you guys want to with some of these options as we engage the board in our initial discussion about our 4 candidates. Now, I know there's a big football game coming up on Sunday, so I thought for fun, I will pick on my fellow Chiefs fans here and ask for their direction in which options you think are best for our initial question here. Any Chiefs fans out there that will help me with responses to this question on your screen? I'm going to randomly pick on a few people if that's okay. I see Josh or Paulette. Would you mind weighing in on any options here that you think might be good ones to select?
Sure. This is Josh. I think probably a good one would be review the process that was used to that point, you know, how you came to those 4 candidates and the criteria that you used to make that happen.
Yeah, kind of level set with the board and remind them. Thank you, Paulette.
Hi, Paulette, Dallas Cowboys fan. I would like them to, again, explain the importance of the decision, but I also would like them to provide an overview of the data that was derived from the various interview teams as a reminder.
That's great. And again, we don't have to select one here. We can select multiple, but we would have to think about what's the order or process that I might want to present that data to the board since you're facilitating. So I think those are great options. Let's progress for time's sake.
So we're here to make a recommendation to the superintendent on the new hire for the high school principal. Let's talk about those candidates. I don't like Hanson or Kramer, and I'm not sure the community is ready for the other 2. So I recommend we start over.
Now, that's not fair to the remaining candidates. They came in and interviewed too. I don't disagree with the 2 you want to throw out, but the other 2 interviewed just as well and are highly qualified. And is this community so set in ways that they won't accept a leader of color or a confident woman? I think the rest of you should weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what everybody's saying. Definitely think we just need to kind of slow down, not start over from scratch, go through our candidates that we currently have.
Okay, so I love this little video because if you've ever been through a scenario like this with a hiring team or board, you probably get a little anxious yourself because it might not be a comfortable setting. You're also starting to see where a little bias is sneaking in here. And one of the board members is starting to call it out. Others perhaps not as comfortable right now. And they're at a point where they're talking candidates and perhaps, you know, deciding against some. So kind of a pivotal point with the board as well. Let's proceed.
You recognize right out of the chute that the board is off to a rough start. How will you respond? Select all that apply. Intervene and focus on qualifications? You need to help them avoid getting sidetracked. Allow the conversation to continue? As a facilitator, you need to be careful not to obstruct meaningful conversation and debate. Agree that the community concerns are real. Above all, you need to be aware of and respond to the needs of the community. Remind them that students are stakeholders. While community concerns are real, overlooking a qualified candidate is a disservice to the kids. Remind them that support of diversity is important. Your role here is to keep them focused on and moving towards the standards.
Okay, we got some good options here as you try to facilitate and wrangle in the board. I picked on my Chiefs fans. Do any Eagles fans want to weigh in on this one?
Yes, I'm speaking on behalf of the proud Philadelphia Eagles
Okay.
outside of Philadelphia. And we
Great.
believe that the first bullet, which pertains to intervening and focusing on qualifications, would also help to address those generalized impressions or opinions that people have of others just based on their protected class, such as race, religion, age, sex, etc. So we think that is the first place that this process should be in this process that should be addressed in order to address any stereotyping that may be going on.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Get back to the objective parts here and the facts. That's really good, and good luck Sunday as well.
Go birds, go birds. Thank you.
Did you have anything you'd do second, or otherwise? I see Josh. I see your hand up here. You want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think that was what everybody just said. That first option is very important, but I also think that the fourth option, reminding them that it's the students really that are the stakeholders, and we can't overlook qualified candidates because really we need to focus on what's best for kids.
Yeah.
And I'm in California, so I didn't say I'm a 49ers fan. That's why I didn't join any group.
Yeah, Paulette.
I also know that the community concerns are real. And so I think that should be strongly considered about the community, but also part of the strategic actions of the district may be that you're supporting diversity. So that also should not be overlooked.
Yeah. Really, I mean, if we're honest, all of these are important. But the simulation I hope you see here is really forcing participants to think through and prioritize how they respond as that district leader, right? So I'm going to move with those three, acknowledging that they're all important. And, everybody's style might be a little different in how they address them, but certainly important to keep the conversation objective on this important hire.
You feel the need to have the board take a step back. Which of the following will you do now? Intervene? You need to influence the direction this discussion is taking. Don't intervene. You need to allow this discussion to continue without getting in the way.
Now, I realize on this one, you might think, well, geez, Trent, this is a no-brainer, intervene or not, right? But I want to pull you back just slightly and remind you that as a superintendent, if we put ourselves in their seat, they're 6 months on the job here. So they don't have a ton of perhaps wins or credibility built with this board, who's obviously their boss. So I think this one, it's maybe seems superficial, like we should intervene right away, but I do think that might be a little delicate as well if you think about how new the superintendent is to the role. Okay. So is it fair to say, though, the right answer on this one is probably to intervene? And I'm going to look at body language here. Getting a few thumbs up. Don't want to give it away, but let's see where the track takes us.
You've chosen to intervene. Which of the following will you do now? Show benefits to kids? Reiterate that we need a collaborative decision.
Okay, so again, kind of back to our last option. Do we want to talk about and kind of put the focus back on students on this important hire? Or go back and talk to the board about the importance of consensus with the board? If you will, just give me a 1 if you want option 1, and give me a 2 if you think we should proceed with option 2. Seeing a couple 1s. Working on my wait time. Okay, it looks like I had the majority of 1s where we're talking about keeping the focus on students. Okay, in an effort to refocus the board and assist them in recognizing possible unspoken agenda, you decide to intervene with a quick overview of bias. Bias is defined as learned attitudes or stereotypes that exist in our subconscious and can be involuntarily affect the way we think and act. And you can see here's some forms of bias, not all, but some on our screen.
What bias do you see from some of the board members? List them in the box below.
I'm going to ask you guys to just put in your chat, and I'll transpose it into this chat box. But so far in the simulation, what type of bias have you heard come out from board members? If you'll just put in the chat your thoughts, I will look at those and respond for us. What types of bias have you seen from the board members so far sneaking into this conversation? Okay, I see a lot of the same answers, and I wanted to also mention, thank you, community not ready for maybe a particular candidate or diversity at all. The common answers there were obviously racial bias, stereotype bias, gender bias, personal bias there as well. Good answers as we start to identify that from the board members. So at this point, we asked the group to define precisely what they mean by, and somebody just mentioned this, not ready yet. There are sideway glances and perplexed looks, but no one speaks out. So after a few long moments of silence, you draw a clear line back to the state standards and by reminding your board that despite the challenges of introducing diversity into a homogeneous community, our focus must remain on identifying the most qualified candidate and then finding ways to help them successfully integrate into the community. Seems like a good way to frame the conversation here with the board.
With the tension in the room quickly escalating, you decide it's probably best to interrupt the now heated debate, thank the board members for their input, and recommend a candidate.
Okay, so trying to push it forward again, trying to get consensus from the board.
I think a woman leading our high school is just what this community needs. It'll be a great role model for our daughters.
Are you kidding me? I disagree. I think we should just start over. I mean, we haven't even vetted the remaining candidates yet. I think starting over the process is way too premature.
Yeah, I love this. I mean, you're starting to get emotion from board members, and we talked about the bias coming out clearly from some of these board members. So progress from there, if you will, Ken.
Overview of bias. What bias do you see from some of the board members? List them in the box below.
Go to the next one. We talked about stereotype, gender, racial bias there.
With
There we
the
go.
tension in the room quickly escalating, you decide it's probably best to interrupt the now heated debate, thank the board members for their input, and recommend a candidate.
There you go. I don't want to fight about this. I think any of the candidates will work. Can't we just select one and move forward?
As long as it's not Kramer. I don't like his ethics. I'm concerned with what people are saying.
Yeah, Irene is right. Let's dump Kramer and let's pick one of the others.
Okay, so they're at a point here. We can see the candidates there if we have a profile, and as Ken clicked on it, Ken, if put your cursor back on the left there, you can see we actually have a candidate profile down here with information that the board would have under the character preview. Those were our high school principal candidates. So you can see at this point, they are leaning towards removing Kramer as a candidate from the list, which is right there, and talking about some of the others. We'll see what our option is here next.
After some tense discussion and recognizing diverging positions, you decide it may be best to break the gridlock by making a recommendation. So, after hearing the board's input, which of the candidates do you recommend? Dr. David Hanson, Mr. Andrew Taylor, Mr. Craig Kramer, Mrs. Lisa Carter.
Okay, so again, what you just heard from board members is that they were leaning against Craig Kramer as a candidate, but the other three are on the table for different reasons. And you as the superintendent, your hire, or at least recommendation to the board about who to hire. So at this point, we decide we're going to make a recommendation. Perhaps David Hanson, Andrew Taylor, Lisa Carter. And I don't know if you're able, Ken, we were going to do a poll here. If we want to do a poll on 1 through 4 to see what folks' top options would be. Otherwise, there it is. That's the poll at the end. Another poll up there. Ken, did you have another poll, 1 through 4, a general poll, or no?
Trying to find it.
No problem.
It's only showing me the one poll.
Okay, we'll do her a different way then. Maybe I'll go back to my Eagles group there. Any recommendations from my Eagles fans on which candidate to recommend?
Well, the Eagles fans in the room didn't think we had ample time to review the qualifications and characteristics of the candidates. They were up on the screen, but we didn't have a chance to really process them. So we don't feel that we have enough information at this moment to make a decision.
You would be a good board member then. And obviously in a real life scenario, we'd have quite a bit more information, data and feedback from the teams, but Ken's putting it back on the screen here so we can see a little bit of their qualifications here. David Hansen there, Andrew Taylor, 10 years middle school specialist degree, credentials towards being a doctorate candidate, active in his community, authored articles increasing student achievement, scores on the community from the community members divided. Let's see, Kramer is the one they were just talking about here. 5 years of middle school experience working on his PhD as well. Good reference from co-workers, accused of bullying by high school teachers. Some fellow teachers in his district have heard rumors about him. Teachers provided some negative feedback. We have Lisa Carter here as well. 3 years of elementary school experience in a similar size school. Has a specialist degree, and confidential references are really good. She does teach part-time at a school of education program, and received high marks around collaboration. Students also provided good support for Mrs. Carter. That enough to perhaps make a recommendation from that group, or anybody else want to make a recommendation here to move our sim forward? There's the poll. Perfect. If you want to weigh in, choice 1 would be Hansen, 2 Taylor, 3 Kramer, and 4 Lisa Carter. Okay, at least so far, it looks like Lisa Carter is getting the nod as we play superintendent here. About 50% of the vote. Okay, Ken, let's proceed with Lisa Carter and advance the sim.
Why did you recommend the candidate you chose? Type your response in the space below.
Okay, and why did we recommend her? You saw just a brief summary of her qualifications. I can paraphrase a little bit that the student feedback on her was very positive. She is proven with student achievement increases and comes from a similar size school. That's a couple different qualifications that were noted in her qualifications of summary. Any others to add about our rationale to the board? Okay, Ken, you want to either type something in or hit submit there and we'll advance? Perfect.
After much discussion, you recommend Mrs. Lisa Carter and state that you believe this has been discussed sufficiently to garner full board support. Taking a moment to look each them in the eyes, you then ask if they can support your recommendation.
Great.
I believe we discussed this long enough, so let's go ahead and come back out of closed session. You have an action item to address. Do I hear a motion to end? I move that we conclude the closed session. I second that motion. Okay, then we move back into open session.
Okay, so at this point, you've made your recommendation, the board's discussed, and you're back to open.
And negotiated between the superintendent and the recommended candidate without the candidate's name being mentioned. You thank the board members and the board moves on to other agenda items. How could you, as the superintendent, support the new principal to be successful in the school and in the community?
This is really important, knowing that you didn't have unanimous board support right away for one candidate. Certainly wanting to make sure your new principal gets off to a great start. What have you done? Could you do to support this principal in your school and your larger community to get off to a good start? I'd welcome some feedback. I see in the chat there, housing support, provide a mentor, which is a really good idea. Some states offer formal mentoring for principals, others not so much, maybe informal. I have found in our hiring process that if you can help candidates address and take care of a lot of the personal needs, whether it's housing or childcare or a job for their spouse, that it often lets them focus on the job itself faster, or at least when they're on contract. So that's important. A moving stipend is certainly nice, as people are acknowledging as well. I would also mention that often with principals and superintendents, the more that they can be visible with the outgoing leader, the better. Gives people some comfort in knowing it's going to be a smooth transition and that there is information being exchanged as they transition roles. Yes, one way to be visible would be an open house event, civic or organizations in town, perhaps. These are all great examples to help get, in this case, Lisa Carter off to a good start. Ken, thanks. That's great.
So what did you learn in this simulation that could be applied to an actual hiring scenario to proactively address any issues of bias that board members may have about candidates? Type your response in the space provided below.
So this is an interesting question, right? If you do this with your administrative team, sometimes I do this with actual school boards and either do it together with them, which pulls out some very interesting conversations, by the way, sometimes even history. Other times I'll have them do it on their own and then gauge their reflection or reaction when I meet with them next. And they find it very interesting and fascinating, and often bring up scenarios where they acknowledge perhaps as a board, they've been biased in a hire in the past. And so I think that's really important, how you facilitate and reflect with the board, because it could certainly help them grow. But in this simulation, even though it's framed at the board level for a high school principal hire, I think it's relevant to any level of principal, perhaps even teachers, coaches. I think there's lessons to be learned there. So I see in the chat here to actively listen and maybe directly call out bias, refocus the board or the hiring team on the objectives and needs to try to make it more objective. And I love there, Kenny wrote, put students first. We rarely make the wrong decisions when we make decisions based on students. Well said.
What are your biases? Have you ever been wrong about a decision because of your own implicit bias based on age, race, gender, etc.?
Now, this was an interesting question, right? I'm not going to ask your opinion here. It's kind of a rhetorical question here on this sim, but we thought it was important to end this sim that if people are vulnerable, they would actually write, and it's, anonymous, taking the simulation, but they could actually acknowledge their own as they go through this. And when I use this in my superintendent preparation courses, this is something that I'll ask them to do. And some maybe have experiences and are at a point where they'll acknowledge bias, and others maybe not. But I think that's an important question to end the sim. Can we advance it one more time so we can take a look at the report?
Despite the underlying bias that initially surfaced in the meeting, your interventions and efforts to keep the board focused on qualifications results in a healthy discussion and unified vote. It helps the board focus on what they can do to support the new principal and create the environment necessary for acceptance and success. Problems still arise, but the new principal, working with the board, was able to successfully navigate even modestly turbulent waters. You hear praise for the new principal from a variety of sources throughout the community.
This has a happy ending so far. And you can see here, I wanted to at least get to this point with the time we had left. We have some pretty good choices here in the report to see which option that we had, align this to the national NELP standards, and then provide some general feedback there. You can see in that first choice, we opted to provide with community results, and then we have feedback there as well. So as a learner, you can see what your option was, not necessarily always a good or bad option, but how you responded and other things to consider on the report after the simulation here. Thank you. And this can be downloaded or printed as well if it's something that participants submit, or perhaps they want to keep for their own portfolio or reflection as well. So that kind of draws our sim to a close. I'm glad we actually navigated through it, and I apologize for the technical error there. I'm not sure what the issue was and had it queued up. I ran through it just this morning again, but I apologize for that because the videos in this simulation, I think, really make it more real. When you get the emotion and see the bias firsthand, that is part of this hiring process. So I hope you see the value to the simulation, bias in the hiring process. And as Ken has in the slide there, I've done some pretty good research with David DeYoung, who's on the call, and others actually to see the effects of simulations with my students. There's some pictures of our students. I have used simulations in the hiring process to actually have a board watch superintendent candidates navigate the sim and see how they respond to different scenarios and to help make their decision. And you can see on the screen there some of the qualitative feedback from my students about how engaging the simulations are, how they're specific, because there's simulations now on lots of stuff. And the discussions that you have that aren't always great in a Zoom setting like this, but certainly get chats and polls and discussions. But the discussions that you're able to have about right answers, but also other options and navigating an important topic like bias in hiring or lots of other topics in a safe space is really critical to build confidence and be able to navigate scenarios when you have to in the real world. So again, I hope you see the value. I will gladly answer questions and stay on longer if folks want to discuss or go deeper into the simulation. Apologize again for the technology issue there, but hope you value the sim as much as I have and really enjoyed putting this meaningful one together.
And thank you so much, Trent. It's great. And one of the things that, really cycling back to that last question that we ask is, if one of the areas that we're looking to engage in, especially, given what we started out with, which is the churn and the difficulty in the job, part of the problem is, we don't have to tell you that the challenges that are out there is the heat that is being experienced. Sometimes it's bias and sometimes it's other things, but the important is the underlying element is the emotion and how we can be emotionally charged in our decision making, where we're not necessarily being as thoughtful as we might otherwise be. And if you're familiar with some of Brene Brown's work on emotional granularity, being able to actually articulate what it is we're feeling can take some of the air out of that pressure, right? Which includes bias, right? So this is an opportunity there's no gotcha moment here, but the opportunity to surface whether or not we have a bias and to reflect upon that and how that might affect my decisions. So that when I'm facing an issue where bias might be presenting itself in my head, that I can reflect on the idea that, oh, wait a minute, I have a bias. I still need to be a little bit more thoughtful. Or, wow, I'm feeling really angry right now. And I'm angry, and it's valid. Okay, we're not gonna, it's not, the issue is not to judge it, but to allow for the fact that we are feeling it, and then to move past it. And to have that space where we can practice and be able to reflect is a key issue that we're trying to get at with this modality, because it does allow us to provoke the emotion, to provoke the bias, but at the same time allow for reflection so better decisions can be made. And especially when it's done in the context of a district or a group of students in a particular course where there is a focus to the instructional elements, which may be, or the strategic elements, which may be at play, so that there can be alignment. There can be greater insight amongst a team, amongst peers, so that opportunity can actually have legs, if you will, and go beyond just the experience in the moment. So we're very excited about the opportunity to continue these developments, and we have greatly enjoyed the partnership with Trent and the opportunity. And some of you participated in the webinar we did in December, where we actually engaged in a simulation development collectively. And we did one on learning loss. And actually, I'm happy to be able to share that we will have something for people to look at within the next few weeks. And if you're interested in seeing that sim and giving us feedback on it, then we'd actually ask that you let us know and be in touch with us. And I'm going to relaunch a poll here just real quickly because we're interested in gathering information and obviously getting better. We do apologize again for the technical snafu. But we would like to actually ask if you could please respond relative to your experience. How relevant did you find the simulation in the first question? And what did you enjoy about this webinar? Again, selecting as many as you like for our self-improvement. And are you interested in providing simulations to your aspiring leaders? Obviously, we're interested in that. But please, and we are going to stick around. We do want to respect that some people need to leave at the top of the hour in respecting your time. But if anybody is interested in asking additional questions or seeing additional information, we're happy to stay on and respond, and certainly opening up to other questions. Also calling your attention, we will be doing some webinars next month as well. We're still figuring out exactly the dates, but we're looking at an opportunity to share some research on the efficacy of simulation with respect to engagement and self-efficacy of participants, especially leaders, but also looking at the role of counselors. So we've been seeing a lot in the news of the importance of counseling and maybe the how it's not necessarily being attended to in the manner in which, from a volume perspective, that there are not enough counselors available, but the importance of that role. And looking at one of our counselor sims actually around a security scenario, maybe kind of ripped from the headlines, if you will, if I might dare I say something that happened in Virginia recently. But in terms of dealing with decision-making in that kind of moment where we have to make decisions, I'm not talking about any kind of, God forbid, first-person shooter. That's not our job, but in terms of the decision-making around a security issue and how we navigate through a school process, that is the exercise we're looking to engage in. So thank you for your feedback. I'm going to end this poll. And if you're interested in learning more information, there's this QR code. And again, open to questions. But thank you all again for your attendance and your participation. And we will certainly keep you informed of upcoming sessions. And feel free at this stage to unmute and go ahead and ask. So that's certainly an option. And go Birds, of course. I'm down the street in Ballackinwood, so go Birds.
I knew that was risky, picking on people, Chiefs, but I thought it was only timely with the big game coming up.
And not too many people wanted to volunteer that information. I don't know if that's fear of what's coming, but